Hello, everyone. This is the 222nd episode of Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I interview English freelance football journalist Mr. Alex Connor as we discuss Chelsea in the decade of the 1990s. Mr. Connor has a Substack page called The Chelsea Connection. Welcome, Alex.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about Chelsea in the 90s.
So, can you introduce yourself and your trajectory into football?
I'm 25 years old now, and I've played football all my life since probably joining the team age of six. Always played football. Wasn't quite good enough to get past the that casual level. So for the past like 3 years, been working as a football journalist, like a variety of different like clubs, print, digital outlets and stuff. And then obviously support Chelsea through my dad. Yeah, always followed the team, always and take a keen interest, hence why I've got my Substack set up as well, which is a bit of like a passion project where I just kind of no real schedule on it really, just kind of write about topics that interest me and that kind of suit the narrative at the time. So for example, today I put a post up about Reece James. Obviously Chelsea beat Nottingham Forest yesterday and Reece James scored and it was his three no 200th appearance for the club. So quite a big milestone for him. So I wrote a piece on him and obviously being a Cobham graduate as well. So I'm very passionate about the club. Even before my time, I was also talking about the 90s and I was born in 2000. So, but I know a lot about the 90s through friends, through my dad as well. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Let's go back in time. We think of Chelsea nowadays as this mega club, as part of the elite. And it's kind of hard to imagine that when we're talking in the beginning of the 90s, they were nowhere at that level. So, can you describe the status of the club in the English football landscape as we come to this new decade of the 1990s?
You are right in what you're saying. I'd say probably the late 80s slash early 90s are probably some of the lowest points for Chelsea in the past like 50 or 60 years. Because in the 1970s, we won the FA Cup against Leeds, but then by the end of the 70s, you get relegated. And then we come into and we're yo-yoing between the first and second division. Then we come to the beginning of the 90s, and the club is probably, I think the word to describe it is probably extremely unfashionable by this point, like beginning of the 90s, they're back in. So it was called the First Division and then became the Premier League in 1992, I believe. By this point, they're kind of one of these, I hate to say it, but sort of boring, just solid Premier League clubs. You're kind of floating in mid-table, just below mid-table, in like not too much fear of getting relegated, but they're not in any sort of position to kind of challenge the top like
Right. To put it
six or
bluntly, they were an
seven.
average side.
Yeah, yeah, I'd
Yeah.
say so. Very average.
A constant in this story is the Chelsea chairman, Ken Bates. Can you summarize his trajectory into involvement with Chelsea?
Well, he's an extremely polarizing figure, but I feel like whatever you hear about him and say about him, like one thing that I think cannot be discounted is his influence at the very beginning. Like Chelsea in the 80s were in tremendous, crippling, like financial debt. And like I said before, it was an extremely unfashionable time for the club. Like, they didn't have anything. So he came in and I think he bought the club, I think it was for £1 in 1982. The stadium, and then at this point, the club were also close to losing their stadium. And like, who knows if they'd lost the stadium, like what that would be like in the future. They nearly lost the stadium, and he managed to save that from these developers. And there was talks of even Chelsea ground sharing with Crystal Palace and things like that. So he kind of saved the club from that and bought it for £1. And they obviously had huge debts, but he helped the club through these debts. And at the beginning, like I said, in the 1980s, early 90s, it was an extremely tough and unfashionable time for the club. And he kind of rescued them really and then gave them that platform, kind of build that success on. I mean, he was at Chelsea. I mean, he joined in 1982 and left in 2003, which is like a tremendous long time. But obviously, those first 10 years were really tough. So to stick that out and kind of stay through with the club in those difficult times, I think is like a real testament to him.
Yeah.
Although there was lots of controversy with him as a person as well. Lots of controversy because he didn't necessarily always see eye to eye with the fans. Remember, there was one point where there was problems with Chelsea, like crowd control, I think, at some stage, and he kind of proposed electric fence or something, which is obviously a ridiculous and crazy idea for a bunch of football fans to like. But he did give the platform to Chelsea to be what it is today.
Can you describe the backbone of the team in the beginning of this decade, still led by manager Bobby Campbell?
Beginning of the 90s, probably your main person who was also one of the main guys, or was the main guy in the 80s, is Kerry Dixon. I think he's in Chelsea. He's one of our top goal scorers of all time. I think he's definitely in the top five. Couldn't tell you exactly where, but he's definitely up there. But obviously, the bulk of his goals came in the 80s. So by the start of the 90s, he's kind of getting towards the end of his career. But as he is kind of coming out, I think the main person who we'll definitely discuss later is Dennis Wise. Like his kind of like breakthrough at Chelsea or when he joined was in 1990 and 1991, and kind of Dennis Wise is a legend of the football club. Probably after John Terry's the club and Azpilicueta, he is the club's most successful captain. Like he came in the 90s and stayed for a decade and was massive for Chelsea. You've also got kind of younger player like Graham Lasso as well, was another kind of important younger player as well that was coming through the ranks. So yeah, I'd definitely say Kerry Dixon and probably Dennis Wise are your two standout, most well known and most influential players at this time, I'd say.
And other names may be familiar to football fans. You have Dave Besant in goal, Steve Clark, the current Scotland
Mm,
manager. You also have others like Jason Cundy that Chelsea fans would remember, Tony
yeah.
Dorigo, of course, Ken Mankau, the Dutch defender, Frank Sinclair, who would later play for Jamaica.
Mm,
Also, others like Graham Stewart would later join Everton, the Scottish striker Gordon Dury, and also the Northern Irish international Kevin Wilson. So these are some
mm,
of the familiar names as we come to the beginning of the decade. Let's look at this first season in the decade, 1990-91 season. You said that the arrival of Dennis Wise would be critical and he would play a key role and he would witness the evolution of this club in this decade. And he would be one of the constants from the old regime into the new glamorous regime, so to speak.
mm,
And of course, he'd been part of the crazy gang at Wimbledon when they won the FA Cup in 1988.
mm,
So he would be the key signing for this new season. You also have the Irish midfielder Andy Townsend. He was also
mm.
a key signing in this first season of the decade. And also Glenn Hoddle. He also joined during this season, but I don't think he ever played. He came just to get fit. I don't remember, but he never played. He
Yeah, it
just
was a
joined.
very short period
Right,
that I'm the same as you, I couldn't exactly say, but he definitely didn't do anything notable as a player at Chelsea. His kind of
right.
influence at Chelsea all came from the managerial role.
Right. And you have others like Clive Wilson who would join QPR and Graham Roberts would join West Bromwich Albion. And later you have the Welsh midfielder Peter Nicholas who's also offloaded during the season. Chelsea would again finish in mid-table. They finished 11th, but they would reach the semi-finals of the League Cup. I would say it's a typical season for Chelsea at this
Mm.
point.
Yeah, I'd agree. I would agree. I would agree.
Just to pick up on what we said earlier and your thoughts on it,
Mm,
in a way, Wise would be the last link to the English base of the club by the end of this decade. So,
mm.
how important of an acquisition was he?
Wow, I think he's probably one of the most important, not even just in this decade, I'd probably say in Chelsea's history, really, when you look at kind of longevity, the influence, the trophies he won, the squads he was part of, like you said, the different kind of periods that he played in. But he was kind of, I mean, obviously, like you've probably seen from watching football. Like back in the 90s, you could get away with a lot more on a football pitch in terms of like fouls and physicality and aggression. And so he kind of embodied what fans love. He had that like tenacity, he was combative, he was ruthless, he had that fighting spirit. He would probably do anything to win, which he has done in the past. I mean, there is I think you've seen the video, but Chelsea are playing Man United at some point in the 90s. And as he gets up, Dennis Wise, he pinches Nicky Butt on the leg, I think. And then Nicky Butt gets up and like knees him and like kicks him and like he falls down and Nicky Butt gets a red card. But that's like the type of thing that fans like want to see, that kind of like that gamesmanship really. And like Dennis Wise had that in abundance. And he kind of was the face of success that many generations of Chelsea fans can't like didn't see before. Like he was kind of face of the first wave of success that many generations of fans had for years, and so many fans attached themselves to Dennis Wise because he was the captain, the driving force of like the first successful team that the club had in over 20 years. I mean, he joined in 1990 and he became the captain in 1995, which was the same year that Glenn Hoddle was appointed as manager. And obviously, Glenn Hoddle back then was a very young manager. It was a big decision to give Dennis Wise a captaincy, but he even before coming to Chelsea, like he won the FA Cup at Wimbledon. Like he was a very established Premier League player, so it made sense. And then from 1995 onwards, that is, I mean, that period from 1995 to 2000 is kind of a bit of a golden era for Chelsea. And other fans probably don't really realise this because when they think of Chelsea, they just think of the Abramovich era, which is fair enough. But then Chelsea won the FA Cup twice, the Cup Winners' Cup, the League Cup, and Dennis Wise was there throughout for all of them, scored goals, played in the finals, and kind of has this incredible legacy at the club. He's like this like fiery, relentless competitor that people just really latched onto. And I think in total he won six major honours at Chelsea and made 445 appearances over 11 years. So also to be at a club for a long time, but he was also very consistent with injuries. That never really got injured, was always available, was always willing, was always hardworking, kind of was the same under each. Because obviously, even Chelsea back then, there was quite a big turnover of managers, which I'm sure we'll discuss later. They had a lot of managers. And also, I think a key point is a lot of the managers that Chelsea appointed were younger. Obviously, great players like Vialli, Hullet, and Hoddle were all incredible players. But I think like what people don't really realise is they were rookies in the managerial game that needed a lot of support, and kind of Dennis Wise's determination and experience and passion, I think, was a major sticking point for all of them. And I feel like the fact that he stayed there that long and continued as captain under all these managers kind of showed how brilliant he was. And I think that's kind of testament to him. And yeah, he'll always be a Chelsea legend. I think my dad loves him and I've watched a lot about him. So yeah.
Let's look at the final season of the old First Division, the
Mm,
1991-92 season. You have the arrival of English defender Paul Elliott from Celtic, a Scottish defender Tommy Boyd from Motherwell, as well as Vinnie Jones from Sheffield United. Later on, you'll have the arrival of Clive Allen from Man City, but he would leave after just a couple of months and join West Ham United. Also, later in the season, Tommy Boyd, who didn't really fit in at Chelsea, he would be exchanged with Tony Cascarino at Celtic, and they would go in opposite directions. Other players who left included Kevin McAllister, who joined Falkirk, Gordon Jury joined Tottenham, John Bumstead joined Charlton Athletic, and others like Kevin Wilson during the season and Jason Cundy would also be offloaded.
mm,
And again, this would be another average season by Chelsea. They finished 14th in this last season. So it's the
mm.
same, but they have a new manager, though, the Scottish Ian Porfield. But it's all the same, the mid table.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it was all very mid-table. I mean, it was, yeah, they came fifth in 89, 90, I believe, but then they just kind of slip into this inertia of mid-table. And like you described earlier, it was kind of, they weren't even bad. They were just bang average, really.
The 1992-93 season is the inauguration of the English Premier League. But
Mm,
the status of the club remains unchanged as it's still a modest average side. And in this 92-93 season, we have the arrivals of Scottish striker John Spencer from Rangers, Scottish
Brilliant
mid,
player.
yeah,
Brilliant player.
another Scottish midfielder, David Hopkin, arrived from Greenock Morton. Mal Donaghy, the Northern Irish defender, came from Manchester United. Mick Harford arrived from Luton. Another Scottish striker, Robert Fleck, arrived from Norwich. And you have others like Nigel Spackman coming from Rangers. The Russian goalkeeper, Dmitry Karin, will come from CSKA Moscow. But you have the departures of the Dutch defender Ken Mankau, who joined Southampton. Kerry Dixon also joined Southampton. Vinnie Jones would return to Wimbledon. Mick Harford himself would later in the season leave and join Sunderland. And more significantly, Graham Lassalle would join Blackburn Rovers, who were becoming a power in English football. It's another average season. Chelsea finishes 11th, and Ian Porterfield would be sacked in February and replaced by David Webb. Do you know if there were any expectations that the team might improve in this new format, or everyone expected the same level?
I think everyone expected the same level, but I kind of think it wasn't because of Chelsea themselves. It just kind of you kind of got to look at the other teams at this time, really. I think Chelsea were doing all they could at the time, considering the resources and the things. I think one major thing and one major sticking point is kind of got the backdrop of everything that's going on with the stadium as well. And in the 90s, Stamford Bridge was extremely underdeveloped, like completely different to kind of the stadium in the area we know now. So like a lot of resources, concentration and money was kind of firstly put into keeping the stadium and then obviously turning it into more of a fashionable modern home for the club. So kind of trying to balance that alongside playing was difficult, I think. But I kind of don't really think just staying at the same level is necessarily a bad thing. I think kind of that kind of stability gave Chelsea the platform to build, and they also had good moments. So I'm sure when they mention it, but in 1994 they actually got to the FA Cup final, but obviously got thumped 4-0 by a very, very competent Manchester United team. But it was a big moment for Chelsea because that was their first major final since 1970. So it's like, what, not 24 years later. So despite having a tricky time in the league, kind of that stability in the league, they could still get to a final, which I know doesn't sound like a big thing, but if a club doesn't get to a final for 24 years and gets to one, I thought that's quite a big achievement. So I don't think there was any special expectations because there wasn't like a lot of spending, which I think is a key point. So they didn't have the quality to kind of really push on. So I think they were kind of performing as expected, really.
So let's look at this 1993-94 season where you have the arrival of Glenn Hoddle as player manager, who had promoted Swindon Town to the Premier League, but then chose to be the player manager at Chelsea that summer. You have the arrivals of Danish defender Jacob Kjellberg, and you have former Newcastle player Gavin Peacock arriving. And later in the October, you have the arrival of Mark Steen from Stoke City. As far as departures, Graham Stewart would join Everton. Dave Besant would join Southampton. Andy Townsend would join Aston Villa. Later on, Ian Pearce, a defender, would join Blackburn Rovers. So again, in the league, it was a modest showing. The team again finished in mid-table 14th, but they did reach the final of the FA Cup. As you said, they were defeated by Manchester United 4-0, despite being the only team who defeated Manchester United in the league that season 1-0 both times.
Oh,
Uh,
really? I didn't
yeah,
know
yeah.
that.
So, yeah, getting back to Hoddle, let's remember he had been playing in France at Monaco under Arsene Wenger. He was seen as a tactical visionary who was to move the club in a different direction. Again, the team was still inconsistent in the league, though by reaching the FA Cup final, this opened the door to Europe after such a long absence. Remember, Manchester United won the double and Chelsea qualified to the Cup Winners' Cup as a result. So, was that victory and progress in itself?
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. Yeah, and also, like you said, I think even getting Hoddle, like even even though he wasn't a very experienced manager, I think what you kind of have to remember about him that he was one of the best. He still is one of the most technically gifted, most skillful footballers that England have ever produced. Like he was a very glamorous footballer. And so for Chelsea to get him as manager was quite a big statement in that respect. And like I said earlier, it was also another big statement because he was tremendously young. Like I think when he was appointed, he was only 36, I want to say. I mean, now if you in the Premier League, if a team that was mid-table appointed a young manager, we'd all be saying like, no, we're not sure about that. Like, I mean, Brentford just appointed Keith Andrews, and like they're being tipped by a lot of people for relegation. So even though he was this very glamorous, very skillful player, he did not possess a managerial resume that would necessarily fulfill people with much confidence, but he kind of his youthfulness and his experience in a player, he brought like a very modern view to football and tried to make Chelsea more tactically flexible with like a more possession-based system. And kind of, to be honest, through his status and through his name, that was when the beginning of it's called just a foreign revolution when they start to, like we'll talk about later in the mid 90s, get more of like an influx of kind of more skillful foreign players. And I think a lot of that is owed to Hoddle because he recruited them and through his name and his status and his resume, he was kind of able to convince players such as Hullett. He convinced him to come, and then obviously Hullett went on to be manager. There was real progress under Hoddle. Like I said, to get to that FA Cup final was huge. And like we have been talking about, Chelsea were like a bang average mid-table side. And then when I actually have, well, my dad had the 95-96 season review on DVD. So I've watched a lot of the games, even though it was interesting because even though it is starting to have these influx of foreign players, I'd probably say the best player for Chelsea in that season by the video would probably be John Spencer. Like he was brilliant, kind of small, diminutive, not a striker, not a winger, kind of this like hybrid of like playing off the striker. He was brilliant and he hit double figures in 2 consecutive seasons. Yeah, through Hoddle's name and through his status, he brought more tactically flexible football and kick-started this foreign revolution of more players, overseas players coming over to play for Chelsea. And that eventually built up to the end of the century where you've got its majority of players from Europe, and they were brilliant and they won Chelsea those trophies. So yeah, a lot is owed to Hoddle for his work, definitely.
So for the 1994-95 season, we have the arrivals of Scott Minto from Charlton
Mm.
Athletic. David Rocastle arrives from Manchester City, and former Watford striker Paul Furlong coming aboard. You have the likes of Tony Cascarino leaving the club. Later on during the season, you have Neil Shipperley joining Southampton and Robert Fleck joining Bristol City. Again, the team finished in mid-table. They finished 11th, but in Europe, they did reach the semifinals of the Cup Winners' Cup, losing to eventual winners Real Zaragoza of Spain. And along the way, they eliminated Austria Vienna, Club Brugge. So, this European adventure, is that also looked upon as part of the progress of the club and the satisfaction with Huddle as a result?
Yeah, I definitely think so because it was like a new avenue, like trodden avenue for the club at that time to be in Europe. Kind of, I think for any club, really, your first kind of foray into European competition is a massive moment. And the fact that Chelsea kind of didn't, I think an important point with it is that you could kind of look at the situation and be like they just kind of rested, qualified for Europe and rested on their laurels maybe. But through signing these overseas players and other British players, they really kind of pushed on and really tried to make a go of it, I think. And you can kind of see that through the league finishes and the trophies as well. I mean, they eventually are successful in Europe later on in the century, which I'm sure we'll discuss. But I think it shows mentality of the club, I think, to not just completely rest on their laurels, really, to kind of keep pushing, keep signing those players. And yeah, like I keep saying, I think Hoddle holds a special place for a lot of Chelsea fans, really.
For the 1995-96 season, we have the arrival of a Dutch superstar, Ruud Gullit.
Mm.
We have to put in perspective what a great star he was at that point. He was the Ballon d'Or in 1987, one of
Mm.
the greatest names in European football at that point. So his arrival was a massive coup at that point, straight from the Italian Serie A. I think some people may have dismissed it that maybe he's winding down his career in England. At the time, there was a lot of publicity regarding his arrival and what a big deal it was. You also have the Welsh striker Mark Hughes arriving from Manchester United. Later in the season, you have the arrival of the Romanian defender Dan Petrescu from
I was
Sheffield
just about to
Wednesday.
I was
Yeah,
just about to say, have you got him on your in your notes? Because
yeah.
is back to back him. He was the first overseas player for Chelsea to reach 100 appearances for the club.
Yeah, yeah, one of the heroes of this end of the decade, as
Mm.
well as Irish defender Terry Phelan, also arrived from Man
Mm.
City. That season, again, Chelsea finished at mid-table. They finished 11th. However, they did reach the semifinals of the FA Cup, losing to Manchester United. But was the signing of Hullet, was this a statement that Chelsea were ambitious and looking to play a more continental game?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. It was a massive statement, really. I mean, like you said, to sign a player who previously won the Ballon d'Or, won the European Cup with AC Milan. He won the what was it with Netherlands? And he scored. I think it was the
Oh, the
Euros with
Euros.
Netherlands,
Yeah, the
maybe. Yeah.
1988 Euros. Yeah.
For like with to have a player of that with that kind of CV come to the club, I think is incredible. And it also kind of creates this snowball effect, really. And like him joining then prompted, like you said, Mark Hughes to join, who had been brilliant for Manchester United. It also prompted, I mean, Dan Petrescu's another one, really, where not quite obviously the same hold on culture that Hullit's got, but he was a player that played in the European Cup final for Star Bucharest. He was in the Romania squad who reached the quarterfinals of I think it was the World Cup or the Euros in the 90s as well. So he was another
94 World Cup. Yeah.
yeah, so he was another brilliant player. And yeah, it kind of prompted a lot of other players to join and kind of kick-started this kind of new era for Chelsea where you get this influx of like other European stars really that have kind of been the driving force behind Chelsea's success.
In the summer of 1996, everything would change at the club along with its status. It was the first season of the new Bosman ruling in effect, right after a successful Euros in England. Glenn Hoddle was appointed as the new England national team manager, and in his place, Ruud Gullit was appointed as his replacement as player manager. Gullit would naturally look to the Italian market and bring in stars like Vialli and Zola, among others. From this moment, the club became more of an international side rather than a British one. Was this the true reference point of all the changes?
I would probably say yes. I would think so in terms of because like Hoddle leaving to go to England. I mean, when anyone's appointed as the England manager, it's absolutely huge. So for him leaving, that was a massive moment and piece of history. Then to appoint Hullet again, even though he was an incredible player, like didn't have any managerial experience or like any trophies as a manager to kind of back up his appointment. So it was a risky appointment as well in that sense, but in also a way it was safe because he knew the Premier League and he knew the players and the players liked him. And also, like I keep saying, through his status like Hoddle, he was able to attract these players. And you look at, like you were saying about the Italian market, I mean, three kind of big names from the Italian market that Chelsea grabbed was Zola, Di Matteo, and Vialli, who all were brilliant for Chelsea in different ways and scored big goals. I mean, another player that was signed when Hullet was manager, who probably kind of goes under the radar a bit, who wasn't from the Italian league. How much you know about him is Frank Leboeuf, another brilliant player, got an incredible resume for club and country. So he was another massive like international star that Chelsea managed to grab and like it kind of really heading into that season, even though we just come off the back of a mid-table finish and lost the manager, there was a lot of positivity around the club because they'd got all these huge international stars, really, and even other teams that are ahead of them. I mean, Arsenal kind of had their own. Chelsea kind of went more down the Italian route. Arsenal kind of went more down the French route at this point, with Arsene Wenger joining, kind of him bringing over the more French players. It was huge for Chelsea, and it kind of was the platform for even the club like we know now, and how like diverse Chelsea's team is across different nationalities. But yeah, I'd definitely say that 1996 was a starting point for Chelsea to really flourish and gain more like worldwide recognition due to the players that they were signing.
They were no longer a mid-table team from this moment on. Yeah.
No.
So let's look at this 1996-97 season. So Hullet signed Gianluca Vialli from Juventus, Roberto Di Matteo from Lazio, French defender Frank Leboeuf from Strasbourg. Later on, you have the Norwegian goalkeeper Frode Grodas arriving, as well as in November, you have Gianfranco Zola arriving from Parma, and what a signing he would be for the club. As far as departure, you have the likes of Nigel Spackman, Paul Furlong, later John Spencer, and Terry Phelan leaving the club. So you can see that the British contingent is slowly being offloaded as the team is becoming a more international side. And
Mm,
of course, the club finished high in the league. They finished sixth, which
mm.
was no one would have bet on it just a year before. And there was finally some silverware with the triumph in the FA Cup as they defeated Middlesbrough in the final. Was this FA Cup victory the launching pad for future victories?
I'd definitely say so. I mean, it was their first trophy, that first major trophy since they won the FA Cup in 1970s. And my dad, who would have been in his mid-20s at the time, said that he was in the Trafalgar Arms, which is a pub on the King's Road, like right round Stamford Bridge. And he just said it was crazy, just full of fans at this time. I mean, for any club, I mean, the FA Cup in England is huge, like absolutely massive. Like everyone's obsessed with it over here, like all kind of levels and all parts of the pyramid in English football. So for anyone to win it's a huge thing. For Chelsea to win it kind of in this first season where they properly blended kind of foreign and British experience, I think was a huge moment really. And they kind of had this perfect balance between players that knew the league and incoming players as well. And then they made a huge progression to kind of finish sixth in the league. And I think another key point about this is, which I'm not sure how many people realize it, is obviously Zola was actually signed in the November of '96, and he won the Football Writers Association Football of the Year for that season. So for a player to like not play until November and win that award for a team that comes sixth, it's not like he's played for a team that have like romped to the title. Like play for a team that's sick. They're a good team, but they're not world beaters. So for him to do that as well, and like one of these like new foreign players, because he probably arrived with a bit of like he's obviously very small. Probably people look at him and they're not really sure what he could offer, but then he starts playing football. Well, we all know how good he is. I mean, here I am. For a couple of years ago, I wrote a piece about Zola's time at Chelsea. Scott Minto, who you mentioned earlier, used to play for Chelsea, and he's quoted as saying, "When you saw him on the training pitch, you suddenly realised you're in the presence of something special. His first touch, I've never seen anything like it. Balls were brought down from the sky with expert control. Zola raised the standards of everyone around him." And I think that's quite a key, this kind of idea of standards and quality, and this kind of idea of rivals, like lifting the mood and raising the room a bit, and kind of bringing on this new era of Chelsea. And like we said, in this little period between 95 and 2000 at the end of the century, it is a bit of like an unspoken golden era for Chelsea, really, where they kind of win these few trophies. And yeah, to get the first under your belt's always massive. So yeah, I don't think people outside of, I think Chelsea fans realize it, but I think outside of the Chelsea circle, I don't think people quite understand kind of significance in it for Chelsea as a football club, but also for how the Premier League was viewed in the sense of bringing over more foreign players, which Chelsea did and did so successfully.
However, in that season, early in the season, the club executive, Matthew Harding, was killed in a helicopter crash on
Mm.
October 22, 1996. What can you say about his impact at the club?
Well, I think he was a Chelsea fan from the area, and I think that kind of idea of people who are fans of the club, like local people from the area, when they get involved, whether they go on to play, whether they go on to do what he did in kind of like a more like senior role. I think people always latch on to those kinds of people because they feel more relatable in a sense. And he was kind of this businessman, like self-made businessman, and then invested his money into Chelsea. And then alongside Ken Bates at the time, that he saw the potential in Chelsea and helped with this kind of financial uncertainty that was kind of engulfing the club at the time. I mean, I think Matthew Harding first started to become involved in 1994, and by my notes, he invested around 26 million in the club. And then also, how I was saying earlier about Stamford Bridge, kind of within this rejuvenation period, the funds and the help that he provided was helped the club to build a new stand in the stadium called the North Stand, and eventually, as we know it now, that was renamed as the Matthew Harding Stand. And I think people don't just name stands of their stadium after people for no reason. So I think his kind of influence and his positivity and the fact he was a Chelsea fan, was the vice chairman, was like a key voice, I think was massive for Chelsea. And he also, from what I've read piece about him, he was close to Glenn Hoddle as well and helped him in this period where Glenn Hoddle was a new up and coming manager. So yeah, I think he was a massive, massive influence. It was really, I think my dad was saying the club, everyone was devastated when he died because he was such a big influence. He was viewed so positively by the fan base.
How was the club able to sign so many high quality foreign players in this post Bosman era, yet unable to spend that kind of cash domestically before?
I think a lot of it came, I mean, Matthew Harding started to invest in the club in 1994, so he injected more cash into the club as well. I think we also, even though we signed a lot of players, there was a lot of outgoings as well during the mid 90s, such as Spencer's and all the other people that you mentioned. So that was that were it's not like they were just kind of stockpiling like they're doing nowadays, or they just keep whoever and there's loads of players on the books. It's a bit more like it was a very like one in, one out kind of policy. But I also think it stemmed from the managers as well and the way that they were able to recruit players. And I think a lot of the players that Chelsea recruits as well, I mean, well, not a lot of them, some of them were kind of more in the back end of their careers. I mean, Zola and Di Matteo weren't. They were kind of still very much at like the peak of their powers, you would say. But then a lot of these other foreign players are kind of players who are signed towards the end of their careers, really. So you got Hullet and Viali. You kind of would think now they just come here for a holiday and just kind of get their paycheck in London, but obviously they didn't do that, and they were very, very good assets for the club. And I think Chelsea just spent. I mean, I know it kind of was roles reversed when Ken Bates left because the club was in kind of financial trouble then because of spending, and then obviously Abramovich came in with his crazy money and saved the club. But I think in the 90s they really took it to a new level to try and invest. But they're also smart with players. Like a lot of these, some of these foreign players, like I was saying, were more in the back end of their careers. So they got the right balance between signing people in their prime and signing people who are experienced. I think that's how they managed to do that.
For the 1997-98 season, you have the arrivals of the Uruguayan Gustavo Poyet from Real Zaragoza. You have French defender Bernard Lambourd from Bordeaux, Dutch goalkeeper Ed De Hoy from Feyenoord, the Nigerian defender Celestine Babayaro from Anderlecht, Graham Lasso returns to Chelsea from Blackburn Rovers. You also have the Norwegian striker Tor Andre Flo arriving from Brann. Later, a French defender Laurent Charvet, also from Cannes. You have the departures of the likes of the Norwegian defender Erland Johnson and the Norwegian goalkeeper Frode Grodas and Craig Burley as well, who joined Celtic. But as you see, the signings are becoming more foreign and more quality. That season, the team not only consolidated its position, but it actually improved. It finished fourth in the league. And again, won more silverware by winning the League Cup, as well as winning in Europe with winning the Cup Winners' Cup, defeating
Mm.
Stuttgart in the final. However, there was a managerial change during the season as Hullet was sacked in February to be replaced by Gianluca Vialli as a player manager. Was the club a contender now?
Not to win the league. So I still think at this time you've got obviously Man United and Arsenal, the two powerhouses of English football, especially Man United. And I just think Chelsea couldn't quite compete with them because they could still attract all I'd say. Like Chelsea still attracted
But they
amazing
were definitely
players.
seen as a cup team at this point.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. They were definitely like a they were a headache to play against. I think that they caused problems for other teams because they had this nice balance. And I think, yeah, they definitely were a top between third and sixth kind of consolidated club and deservedly
And a
so.
fashionable club as well at this point with
Yeah, and
all the foreign
definitely,
players. Yeah.
no, yeah, 100%, definitely fashionable with kind of the players that they attract with this kind of foreign influx of players. And like I've keep saying, kind of with the managerial choices as well, that you look at in Glenn Hoddle, Hullet, and Vialli, you've got three brilliant attacking footballers who were all, when they were appointed, extremely young age for a manager in kind of like their first senior management roles. And I think that kind of in the way that again they continue this trend and it attracts players, I think, because if you're like a player, you want to go play for someone who's had a brilliant career themselves, I think. And it's quite an interesting trend because like I said, now clubs that really do this, like especially top clubs, like they would never like even I mean Chelsea got an experienced manager now, but he was a manager before, whereas like these like back then it was kind of unheard of to do that in like the late 90s. So I think that kind of attracted players as well. And they're all success in their own right. Like Hoddle started this foreign revolution and consolidated the club and gave them the platform to achieve. And then obviously Hullet won the FA Cup and then Vialli, like you were saying, with the League Cup and then winning the Cup Winners' Cup as well. And when he won the Cup Winners' Cup, he was only, I got it on my notes here, he's only 33 years and 308 days old, which at the time meant he was the youngest manager to ever win a European competition, a UEFA competition. And that record stood for 13 years and was actually overtaken by Villas-Boas, who won the Europa League with Porto. And then obviously he went on to manage Chelsea, which was, I mean, the less said about that one, the better. But even then, that's quite funny because it was the club was overtaken by Di Matteo, who's obviously a player in the period that we're talking about. And Di Matteo then was the manager when Chelsea won the Champions League for the first time. So it's funny how way things work.
Another memory from that season is Chelsea's match in the snow against Tromsø in Norway in the Cup Winners' Cup that should have never been played, but they
Yeah, not by today's standards.
yeah, of course. The reason Hullet was fired was really a personality clash with
Mm.
Ken Bates. I believe he still wanted to have a player contract, player manager contract, as well as a manager
Yeah.
contract or something like that. And Ken Bates was having none of that.
Yeah, I
So
think the intricacies of it. I mean, it kind of relates back to the wider point about Ken Bates' legacy, where he's quite like he's a very what's the best word? Controversial and polarizing figure in Chelsea's history. And I think like that sacking of Hullet. I mean, at the time, I think it was probably viewed as a crazy decision because he'd done so well. But then you kind of look at Vialli's appointment and what Vialli achieved, and you can't really argue with it, really. Like, it worked out pretty well.
So 1998-99 season, Vialli's first full season in charge. You have the arrivals of Danish star Brian Laudrup from Rangers, but he would not really fit in at the club. And shortly thereafter, he'd be exchanged with another Danish player, Bjørn Goldbach from FC Copenhagen. Then you have French defender Marcel Desailly coming from AC Milan, The Rock. What a
Yeah,
significant signing that was.
yeah,
You have the unfortunate Italian striker Pierluigi Casiraghi from Lazio, who just a few months later would be injured and his career was over.
Part of the Chelsea striker curse here. So,
You have the Spanish defender Albert Ferrer arriving from Barcelona. Later in the season, you have the young Finnish striker Mikael Forsell from HJK Helsinki. As far as departures, Frank Sinclair would join Leicester. Mark Hughes would join Southampton. And the likes of Mark Steen and Laurent Charvet would also be offloaded. The club would make a play in the league and they would finish just behind Manchester United and Arsenal and would qualify for the Champions League for the first time. You
mm,
also have the team winning the UEFA Super Cup, defeating Real Madrid early in the season. The club also reached the semifinals of the Cup Winners' Cup. All in all, a very positive season. The club were now in a whole different category, I would say, after this season.
mm. Yeah, no, definitely they were considered by far. I mean, to qualify for the Champions League for the first time was a seismic moment, really, in the pre-Abramovich era. Yeah, then to beat Real Madrid, I know it was probably only in the South Cup, which to some people isn't the biggest of deal, but for Chelsea at that time to win that and against Real Madrid, I think was huge for the club as well. And again, kind of these players that they were signing. I mean, you mentioned his name earlier, but Marcel Desailly just won the World Cup with France with LeBeouf playing next to him in the final against Brazil, and then the World Cup winning centre back pairing for France, and then Chelsea's centre back pairing, and then that season Chelsea, I think they only conceded, I think it was 34 goals, which was the second least in the league at the time. So you kind of got this solidity at the back. Then in the midfield, you got like Di Matteo and Wise, and then up front in that season in 98, 99, you got Zola, and he scores 15 goals. And probably, I think he has his most productive year in terms of goals that season. I mean, the season before he scored the Cup Winners' Cup final against Stuttgart. But yeah, that 98, 99 season was probably his most productive in terms of goals. So you kind of have this really well balanced, skillful team. And yeah, I think Chelsea were rightly feared, really. Like, so when you look at these players that they have and these players that they've signed, it's kind of brilliant for a club of that quality at the time. And yeah, definitely gave them a platform to keep succeeding and then keep kind of moving forward at the beginning of the 21st century as well.
So in this last season of the decade, 99, 2000, you have the arrivals of Chris Sutton from Blackburn,
Yeah.
Dutch defender. Well, yeah, he would only last one season and he
Mm,
would have a better success with Celtic. You have the Dutch defender Mario Melchiot, Danish
mm,
defender Jesho, France's World Cup winning captain Didier Deschamps arrived from
mm,
Juventus. Italian goalkeeper Carlo Cudicini, another Italian striker Gabriel Ambrosetti. Later in the season, you have the Liberian star Georges Weah arriving. The club ended up finishing the decade by participating in the Champions League with all these top quality foreign players, and they would reach the quarterfinals before being eliminated by Barcelona. So, as we come to the millennium, was the club now a European power on and off the field?
I'd say European power may be a little bit strong because they'd only had their like one season in Champions League, but by all accounts, they didn't just make numbers. I mean, they got to the quarterfinals and they beat Barcelona. I think it was 3-1, I want to say, in the first leg.
Right, and then
So probably
lost
all the fans are in dreamland, but then the second leg they got smashed
5-1. Yeah.
5-1.
Yeah.
So they were, I mean, to get to the quarterfinals and again won the FA Cup that season as well. And we're in this kind of really solid bracket of between like third and sixth, which was like a really good place
Yeah.
for the
And
club
I
to be in.
think
And
they
all,
had a reputation that they could spend cash.
yeah,
That's
I think
one
by
reputation.
this point as well, the stadium had been sorted as well, which I think was a massive. I mean, you probably, if you watch kind of Chelsea highlights and Chelsea fans watch Chelsea highlights, like you'll see in the 90s that Stamford Bridge is battered, really, like especially in the mid 90s, like it's old, like the stands are missing.
You see
But then towards,
cars on the near the
yeah,
touch.
yeah, yeah, it is old. You wouldn't believe that Stamford Bridge, but yeah, then they by the end of the 90s, the stadium, because you're kind of like the stadium that you play in kind of is the club's identity, if that makes sense. And I think when you play in like a new, fully formed stadium. I think it really gives everyone a boost and makes everything feel more professional. And also when you have the players and the trophies to back things up. Like a constant theme with Chelsea is kind of signing these more experienced foreign players that are kind of either in their prime or a bit older, so they're not like the craziest pricing, but still like of extreme quality. Like Desailly, like Deschamps is another one. I mean, they Chelsea signed Deschamps when they already had Di Matteo, Wise, and I'm not sure if Poyet was there. Have he joined the season?
Yeah,
Poyet
he
might
was
have
still
joined the
there.
season
Yeah.
before. So they had Poyet as well. So they're already adding. So I think that kind of shows it's kind of this ambition really that Chelsea had. And I think when you talk about the 90s, I think a really key point is, I mean, especially towards the end, is like there is often, obviously often a preconception that Chelsea didn't have any history before Roman Abramovich and that the success and things only came when Abramovich arrived. And to a certain degree, that's true because obviously he escalated the success to like an unimaginable level at the time. But like everything we've discussed here, like all the players that played for Chelsea, like the trophies they lifted, like playing in the Champions League, like finishing in the top four, like these are all big achievements for a club that back then were somewhat overachieving away, and they were kind of the new kids on the block really in that sense. Because before the end of the 90s, they hadn't really done anything notable in English football, and then all of a sudden they win the FA Cup twice, they win the League Cup, the Cup Winners' Cup, and they've got all these brilliant players for them. And they've also got the added bonus of being in like the swanky location in West London, which obviously has its the added appeal and added attraction for non-football and football fans anyway. So yeah, definitely say the end of the 90s, just as I was being born in 2000, was definitely a good time to be a Chelsea fan. And obviously since then, it's just been a roller coaster, but in a good way.
In retrospect, was the Bosman ruling the catalyst for the change in a club status, or were there other factors?
I think the Bosman ruling definitely had an effect for Chelsea because a lot of the players, like I said, that they signed were more I couldn't tell you exactly how many people were out of contract, but I think a lot of them were more towards the end of their careers, like your Hullet, for example, like your Viali as well. So I think it definitely helped. It kind of opened up clubs to new avenues in the market and new ways of signing players and new ways of squad building. And I think a key point for Chelsea is that kind of essence of squad building and also offering that path after playing, which Chelsea did through management for these players. But I think at the time that was a very specific thing for Chelsea because like no other clubs were really
Yeah.
appointing these.
And also, I'm thinking as the Bosman ruling occurred, they were really the first club who took to signing foreign continental players.
Mm.
Most other teams, they took some years for them to catch up, it seems like. But Chelsea, because of their managers, perhaps, they were really the first in on it, it seems like.
Yeah, I definitely say so. And I think the only other teams that are doing it were Arsenal and Man United. They're already good anyway, and they were
Right.
already like competing on all fronts and really challenging. But then it wasn't a bigger deal because they were already good. Whereas for Chelsea, you can kind of see the elevation with it, and then kind of this point in 1995 where they start to sign more of these players, and then as they're signing more foreign players, they improve. So there's kind of that clear correlation between signing these European players and improving, like in your Petrescu's, your Di Matteo's, Hullet, Viali, Zola, Poyet. There's like a whole host of them that really, and these are all players that stayed for years and really consolidated themselves at Chelsea and all in really different, meaningful ways contributed to the club's success and how the club is known now.
The contrast in the club status from the beginning and the end of the decade, and all the changes associated. How is this looked upon by club historians?
I think in a really positive way because the change is so dramatic. I mean, I think if you told any Chelsea fan at the beginning from like in between like 1991 and 1994, if you told any Chelsea fan in that period that they would go on to sign all these players and all have all this success, I don't think they would have believed you really. And so I think everyone looks at it in a really positive way, especially kind of like the players and the management. I think the ownership kind of divides opinion. Like I know, like we spoke about him earlier, but Ken Bates is a very controversial figure that made a lot of bad decisions and a lot of good decisions as well. I mean, I advise people listening to this, they want to have like really stick their teeth into something. I think Ken Bates is a good person to read about. So the thing in terms of like the ownership, it's kind of split and people have got a lot of different opinions, but in kind of the players and the manager, I think you kind of look at it as just this ongoing trajectory that keeps going up really and this improvement. And it's viewed in a positive way. And like I said, it gave the platform for Chelsea to go on and improve and become the club that's known today.
Bates, you say he's polarizing,
Mm.
but how did he navigate this change in the status of the club, you think?
So, well, he is more his financial investment. We were saying, I mean, he bought the club in the beginning of the 80s when it was probably at its lowest, like least fashionable point, when it was completely on its knees financially. I mean, I don't know, I'm not great with like the financial lingo and things, but their club was in a financial ruin and was like a bankrupt business, really. Like it was considered crazy to even buy it. And then alongside this, you've got the added issue of Stamford Bridge being a bit of a mess as well. But he kind of is known for his, I mean, I've read what other journalists have said about him. He's kind of known for his my way or the highway kind of attitude. And he also had quite a fractured relationship with Matthew Harding as well. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, he clashed with fans. I mean, at one point, he suggested about having electric fences to stop pitch invasions. He had an argument with one of the fan groups as well, describing them as parasites. So he had a fractured relationship with the fans, I think. But yeah, he gave the platform and invested in the club and then gave the club the platform for it to progress. So yeah, he definitely was in a very and he's a very tricky figure to view at Chelsea. And also he was kind of bailed out a bit by Abramovich because I think Chelsea, due to the investment and due to investment on players, managers, and the stadium, they're in about 60 or £7 million worth of debt. And obviously Abramovich comes in with just these like this crazy amount of money, which kind of then completely eradicates any financial issues. But yeah, it's hard to sum up Bates' tenure really because he was there for so long as well. I mean, like I was saying, it was 82 and he left in 2003, so that's what just over
21
20
years, yeah.
years. Yeah,
Yeah.
just so. But yeah, definitely a lot of good things, a lot of bad things. Financially helped the club and raise its profile, but then the way he spoke and the way he clashed with certain fans and certain, I mean, he had another issue with him and Ruud Gullit. The reason Gullit left is because they had a falling out, I think, and then at the time, fans viewed that as a massive mistake. So obviously, Gullit was doing very well for Chelsea. Yeah, controversial figure, polarizing, but helped and didn't help the club. I think it's the most political way of phrasing it.
So, in closing, are all the greater successes in the Abramovich era and beyond have their root with these beginnings in the 1990s?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, I definitely say so in terms of like more the mid 90s. I think I'd say for Chelsea, the turning point was probably the 1995 season, maybe, or 96. I think around that mid 90s era, I'd say is more. I think the club's success is owed more to that era because that's when they really start to build more of a name for itself in terms of the players that they're signing and the stadiums getting better. They finish higher in the league. So I definitely think kind of success of the Abramovich era is more built upon the mid 90s rather than the early 90s, I would say, because of obviously the mid 90s, there's a lot more success and Chelsea were a lot more respectable football club.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. All our respective contact information is listed on a blog and podcast uploads. So, Alex, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed talking about Chelsea. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to as well. Thank
Thank you.
you.